The shout in the empty room expanded approximately 1,000 words. The echo came first sharp, metallic, bouncing off naked walls that used to hold family photographs. Hand over the money right now. Rena and I need it. Miles's voice cracked through the hollow apartment like the crack of a gavel, announcing judgment. Even the lights seemed to flinch. For a heartbeat, Evelyn Hart didn't answer. She stood near the window, her hands folded loosely in front of her, a pale silhouette against the bruised skyline of Harborview. Outside, a single gull drifted by, oblivious to the war brewing behind the glass. Rena hovered near the door, her manicured fingers clutching her designer purse as if the leather could shield her from the storm she'd helped summon. Her mascara had already smudged beneath her eyes beautiful chaos, perfectly arranged for sympathy. "Miles," Evelyn said softly, the words steady but distant, like the calm before thunder. "Don't Miles me," he barked. "You sold the condo. I promised it to my wife. You had no right." The accusation hung in the air like dust caught in sunlight. No right. The words settled in Evelyn's chest, heavy, familiar. She had lived decades beneath that sentence. No right to rest, no right to want, no right to choose her own life. But today, something inside her spine refused to bend. She turned toward him. For a fleeting instant, the late afternoon glow hit her silver hair, making it look almost like steel. "I have every right," she said quietly. It was the first time in years that her voice didn't tremble. Miles blinked, thrown off by the tone, then recovered with louder rage. "Every right? You're out of your mind. We needed that money for the new house. You promised to think about it." Evelyn smiled, small, sad, and terrifying in its peace. "I thought about it," she said. He froze, eyes narrowing. Because behind those 4 words lurked something he hadn't heard from her since childhood. Finality. Rena's tears began to fall, slow and deliberate, each one a tiny coin in the currency of manipulation. "Mama Evelyn," she whispered, "we had plans. You've destroyed everything." Evelyn studied her, the trembling chin, the quivering lips, the practiced innocence. Once, that tone would have melted her heart. Once, she would have apologized simply for existing in the way of someone else's happiness, but not anymore. "There's something else you should know," she said, her voice calm, deliberate. "A second piece of news." Miles's brows knitted. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn took a step forward, the echo of her shoes clicking through the near-empty space. "You've been looking at me as if I were already gone," she said, "planning your future with the things I haven't yet left behind. But you never realized something, did you?" She paused, her eyes glinting with the quiet power of someone who's been underestimated too long. "I was never as helpless as you thought." He stared at her, chest heaving, confusion spreading across his face like ink in water. "Mom, what are you saying?" Evelyn let out a breath that trembled only slightly. "I'm saying that for the first time in 30 years, I made a decision for myself and I don't regret it." The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. The hum of the refrigerator in the next room had become the only sound. A lonely mechanical heartbeat in a home that no longer belonged to them. Rena finally broke it, voice fragile. "So what now, Evelyn? You expect us to start from nothing, to live on the street?" Evelyn's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "You have jobs," she said. "You have each other. You have everything you need except gratitude." Miles's face twisted, the mask of the dutiful son slipping away to reveal raw greed underneath. "You ungrateful after all I've done for you." Evelyn tilted her head, almost curious. "And what exactly was that?" He faltered. "I visited, I called." You visited when it was convenient," she interrupted gently. "You called when guilt reminded you to. You loved me only when I stayed silent." For the first time, Miles looked uncertain. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The weight of her calm seemed heavier than his anger. He'd always known how to win arguments with volume. He'd never learned how to fight stillness. Rena turned away, wiping her face, her voice trembling with rehearsed pain. "We just wanted a future, Mama Evelyn." Evelyn's reply was soft but sharp. "So did I, and I finally built one." A faint breeze slipped through the cracked window, stirring a half-torn curtain. The sunlight shifted across the bare floorboards, cutting the room into lines of gold and shadow. Evelyn could almost feel Thomas, her late husband, standing somewhere in that light, watching quietly, proud of the woman he used to tell her she could be. She took one last look around the apartment. This had been her cocoon, her cage, her waiting room between what was and what could be. "I think it's time you both left," she said. Miles blinked, caught between disbelief and fury. "You're kicking us out." I'm reclaiming my space, she answered. For years, I let this home shrink around your expectations, but now it's mine again, Evan, if only for the next few minutes. He looked at her as if seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. The woman in front of him was no longer the trembling mother who apologized for everything. She was something new, someone dangerous in her calm. You've changed, he said. Yes, she replied, and I'm never changing back. Rena tugged at his sleeve. Let's go, Miles. But he didn't move. His eyes darted around the room, desperate, like a thief searching for something he dropped. There has to be something left, he muttered. Evelyn's voice softened with finality. There is my piece, and you can't take it. They left without another word. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the picture hooks that once held. Family portraits hooks that now grasped nothing but air. For a long while, Evelyn didn't move. The silence after anger always carries an aftertaste, a faint hum, a vibration left behind by shouted words. She listened to it fade, heartbeat by heartbeat. Then she walked to the window. Harborview's skyline shimmered beneath a pale dusk. Somewhere far below, the city breathed, uncaring and alive. Cars blinked along the avenue. Children's laughter spilled from the park. Life continued, vast and indifferent. She rested her palm on the glass and whispered, "So do I." The reflection staring back at her wasn't the woman she remembered. This one stood taller, chin lifted, eyes dry. There was silver in her hair, and something even brighter beneath her skin, something fierce, unbroken. For years she had been invisible to her son, to the world, even to herself. But invisibility had one advantage. It taught her how to move unseen, to plan without being suspected, to rise without warning. Now she was visible. Now she had returned. She turned away from the window, picked up her coat from the lone chair left behind, and walked toward the door. As she closed it gently, the latch clicked a quiet, final punctuation mark at the end of a long, unfinished sentence. Outside, the evening air smelled of rain and freedom. The streetlights blinked awake one by one like small witnesses. Evelyn walked down the steps, her steps measured, steady, deliberate. Each one sounded less like retreat and more like arrival. The night swallowed her figure, but the echo of her footsteps remained a rhythm of defiance fading into the hum of the city. Rehook. I wasn't born brave, she thought, but today I will act like I was. And, with that, the story truly began. Would you like me to continue with Outline 2, The House of Small Sounds, in the same cinematic 1,000-word depth next? The House of Small Sounds. Grief does not shout, it hums. Some mornings it hums through the pipes, a low vibration in the walls that sounds almost like Alistair clearing his throat. Other mornings it hides in the kitchen fan, or in the ticking of the old regulator clock that refuses to die. The house is full of these small sounds, tiny ghosts of routine that never learned how to leave. After Alistair's funeral 7 years ago, silence became Evelyn Hart's companion. She'd wake at 6 because her body still believed breakfast had to be made for 2. The kettle on the back burner sputtered and hissed, a wounded bird. She liked that noise. It proved something in the world was still responding to heat. The apartment itself was a survivor of better times. A second-floor walk-up in Harborview, with a narrow balcony that smelled of sea salt and old paint. 2 bedrooms, though only one had seen light in years. The other stayed closed, curtains drawn, as if time had been locked inside to keep it from spoiling. On humid nights, the wallpaper in that room peeled a little farther, curling like the corners of forgotten letters. Evelyn dusted the place every Sunday even though no one came. She scrubbed the sink until the porcelain gleamed and watered the spider plant that refused to die no matter how many winters ignored it. Maintenance had become her faith. Order was the only prayer she could still remember. Sometimes, when the city quieted between sirens, she'd think she heard Alistair climbing the stairs. For half a breath, she'd picture his hat hanging on the rack, his deep laugh echoing through the hall. Then the fridge would hum again, the illusion would break, and the silence would resume its throne. Miles visited once a month, never unannounced, never for long. He was a man built entirely of schedules, a banker whose wristwatch might as well have been his pulse. He'd knock twice, step in with his phone already glowing in his hand, kiss her cheek distractedly, and sit. "Hey Mom, how you holding up?" "I'm fine, son, and you?" "Good, busy." That was their ritual. 2 lines, 1 silence. The rest of the visit was an orchestra of notifications, pings, vibrations, the tiny buzzes that marked another conversation happening somewhere else, with someone more interesting. Evelyn would pour coffee he never drank. She'd talk about her neighbor's new dog or the city replacing the street lamps with LED. He'd nod without looking, thumb flicking through messages. After 20 minutes, he'd stand. Gotta run. Rena's waiting. Of course she was. At first, Evelyn told herself this was adulthood. Children grow up, lives diverge, love doesn't vanish, it just gets busy. But busy turned into absence, and absence into habit. Loneliness, she discovered, doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps, it hides in the spaces between sentences, grows roots under every polite smile. By the time you notice it, it has already learned your address. When Miles brought Rena home for the first time, Evelyn had wanted so badly to be like. The young woman arrived in a cloud of perfume and laughter, calling her Mama Evelyn with a sparkle that felt genuine. She handed over supermarket tulips wrapped in damp paper and exclaimed how cozy the place was. Evelyn blushed. Cozy was a kind word for cramped, but she took it as blessing. For a few months, dinners were lively again. Rena complimented Evelyn's casseroles, snapped photos of the table for social media, even helped wash dishes once or twice. When she said, "We'll make sure you're never lonely," Mama Evelyn, the older woman, almost believed her. But kindness, Evelyn learned, can have an expiration date. It began with glances quick, assessing flicks of the eyes. Rena would wander the apartment, fingers grazing the furniture, tapping the wood as if listening for hidden value. She'd ask harmless questions. How old is this place? That sounded increasingly like appraisal. Once, Evelyn caught her whispering measurements under her breath. The air shifted after that, charged with quiet calculation. Then came the comments. "You should really replace this sofa, Mama Evelyn. It's ancient." Evelyn smiled faintly. "It still serves me well." Rena laughed. "Well, when this apartment becomes ours, first thing I'm doing is buying you a new one." When, not if. Evelyn had laughed too, weakly, pretending she hadn't heard the claim, hiding in the joke. That night she sat on the sofa long after the lights were out, touching the fabric as if memorizing proof of ownership. The next dinner went worse. Evelyn spent half the day cooking Alistair's favorite, braised lamb, with rosemary and potatoes, because Miles used to love it as a boy, but Rena barely touched her plate. "It's a bit salty, don't you think, hun?" she said, turning to Miles. He nodded, without tasting. "Yeah, maybe a little." Evelyn's fork hovered midair. She put it down. "Maybe I overdid the seasoning." Rena smiled, victorious. "No worries. We'll get you that new stove when we move in. They have ones that practically cook for you." Evelyn washed the untouched plates alone while they laughed softly in the living room, about mortgage rates and neighborhoods, planning a future she wasn't invited to inhabit. From then on, the apartment changed for her. The hum of the refrigerator no longer comforted. It accused. The clock's ticking mocked her patience. Even the kettle's whistle sounded like a scream she'd swallowed for too long. Each sound was a witness to her erasure. Still, she smiled during their visits, because a mother's love, she thought, was endurance, and endurance was supposed to hurt. That was what she'd been taught. Suffer quietly, love loudly. Yet lately even love had gone mute. Sometimes she'd catch her reflection in the dark window and not recognize it. A woman shrinking at the edges, fading like old paint, invisible. The only time her name was spoken warmly was when someone wanted something. She began talking to the house. "You and me, old friend," she'd whispered to the kettle. "We still work, don't we?" It answered with steam. The fridge hummed in agreement. The spider plant nodded on its shelf, surviving purely out of spite. Together, they kept her anchored to the world. But beneath the hum, new notes were forming. Small, discordant ones. Miles's laughter now carried impatience. Rena's, politeness, pity. Even their silences had weight, pressing against the walls until Evelyn felt squeezed between them. She started counting the seconds after they left before peace returned. 65, 66. And then the quiet would rush back, cold and clean. She began to prefer that silence. It was honest. One damp Tuesday evening, she stood by the window watching headlights smear across the rain-soaked street. From above, her reflection floated in the glass, gray hair glowing faintly from the lamplight, eyes ringed with fatigue. She whispered, "When did I become scenery in my own life?" The city didn't answer, but a taxi horn below honked twice, as if it understood. That night she dreamed of sound again, Alistair's laugh turning into the whistle of a departing train. When she woke, the sheets were damp with sweat and the first birds were calling outside. For the first time, she wondered if staying quiet had been the wrong kind of loyalty. The next day, she polished the dining table until her reflection looked back clearly. Maybe it's time, she told the woman in the wood. The reflection didn't argue. From the hallway, the house listened in its usual language, creaks, hums, ticking clocks. But something beneath those small sounds had changed. They no longer sounded like comfort. They sounded like warning bells before an awakening. Evelyn straightened the picture of her wedding day one last time and whispered, "Hold on, Alistair. I'm about to make a noise they can't ignore." And in the hush that followed, even the kettle stayed silent as if it, too, were waiting to hear what she would do next. Rehook. They weren't visiting her. They were measuring her, and soon she would measure them right back. The bathroom door. There are moments that split your life in two before you heard the words, and after. Evelyn Hart would later remember every detail of that Tuesday afternoon, the smell of lavender soap, the rattle of the bathroom vent, and the distant sound of her son's laughter turning into something sharp. She hadn't expected visitors that day. The afternoon light lay flat across the tiles, pale and cold, and she was humming absent-mindedly while scrubbing a stubborn corner of the mirror. That's when she heard the lock click. The front door, footsteps, two voices. Her heart jumped. Miles and Rena. They hadn't called. At first, she smiled. Perhaps they were surprising her, maybe bringing dinner, but something in their tone made her hands stop mid-motion, the sponge dripping onto the sink. Their voices were low, conspiratorial, heavy, with a kind of excitement that didn't sound like love. She froze. The bathroom was halfway down the hall, door slightly ajar. She could see their shadows moving on the wall, his taller, hers narrow and quick. Instinct told her to step out, to greet them, but another voice, quieter, wiser, whispered, "Don't listen," and she did. For the first time in her life, Evelyn listened not as a mother, but as a stranger, hearing her own obituary. "How much do you think this place could sell for?" Rena asked. Her tone was casual, airy, but underneath it pulsed greed. Miles laughed softly, the kind of laugh he used when talking business. "Hard to say. Maybe 270 to IT if we fix the bathroom tiles." Bathroom tiles. The irony almost made Evelyn laugh. She glanced down at the sponge still in her hand. Was she cleaning for the buyers now? "And with that money," Rena said, "we could finally get the Willow Grove place. It has that big yard. Perfect for the kids." Kids, they didn't even have a goldfish. Miles's voice dropped to a murmur. "She won't sell while she's alive." "Well," Rena replied, the sweetness gone, "she's not going to live forever, is she?" Evelyn felt her breath catch. The tile blurred. The air inside the tiny room turned heavy, hot. Her fingers trembled, and water splashed on her shoes. But she stayed silent, pressing her palm over her mouth as though holding back a scream. Then came the sound that finished something inside. Her Miles's dry chuckle. "Yeah," he said, "when she's gone, it's mine. It's basically my inheritance." Rena exhaled in relief. "Good, because honestly, I can't keep pretending to like her forever." A small, helpless sound escaped Evelyn before she could stop it. Half gasp, half sob, but the running tap disguised it. Her legs went weak. She sat down slowly on the closed toilet lid, staring at the small puddle forming on the floor. The reflection in the water was blurred, distorted, a woman dissolving. She thought of all the birthdays she'd baked cakes for that no one came to cut, the Christmas dinners that went cold waiting for them, the long nights she'd stayed up worrying whether Miles had eaten, whether Rena was treating him well, all of it, every kindness, every sacrifice, reduced to a line item in a conversation about real estate. For years she had convinced herself that her loneliness was normal, that neglect was just a side effect of time, that if she stayed gentle enough, patient enough, they'd remember her again. But now, behind that bathroom door, she realized something brutal. They hadn't forgotten her. They had simply written her off. Tears came, but not the kind that begged for sympathy. They were quiet, steady, old tears, the kind shed by a person who has finally run out of excuses for others. The conversation in the living room went on. The words swirled together, detached from meaning. Deposit, mortgage, future plans. Miles's voice rose with the confidence of ownership, and Rena giggled at something he said. They were already decorating her grave with new furniture. Evelyn's chest ached, but beneath the ache something unfamiliar stirred, not grief, not even anger yet, clarity, pure, blinding clarity. She stood, wiped her face, and caught her reflection again in the mirror. Her eyes looked older, yes, but there was steel beneath the sorrow. "Not yet," she whispered to the woman staring back. "You don't get to die yet." When she finally stepped out, they were seated comfortably on the sofa, scrolling through listings on Rena's phone. The betrayal was so complete, so absurd, that she almost laughed. Rena looked up first and feigned surprise. "Mama Evelyn, we didn't know you were home." A lie delivered with perfect ease. Miles didn't even lift his eyes. "Hey, Mom." Evelyn forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Coffee." They both declined in unison, too busy planning her absence. She sat quietly in the armchair across from them, hands folded, pretending not to notice the tension. Her gaze moved across the room, the framed wedding photo of her and Alistair, the crocheted cushions she'd made the year Miles was born, the chipped corner of the cabinet that had once held his toys. Everything here had been touched by her love. And yet none of it felt like it belonged to her anymore. 10 minutes later, they stood to leave. Miles kissed her cheek mechanically. Rena gave a half-hug perfumed with pity. "Take care of yourself, Mama Evelyn," she said, as though addressing a tenant she didn't plan to renew, when the door closed. Evelyn sat back down on the sofa and stared at the empty teacup on the table. The silence returned, thick and heavy, but this time it didn't comfort her. It accused her. She whispered into the stillness, "When did I become this? Someone waiting for her own death just to stop being an inconvenience." No answer, just the fridge humming, the clock ticking, the kettle cooling, the small sounds of a house that had learned her silence too well. She let herself cry then, not the pretty, polite kind of crying you can hide behind a tissue, but deep, ugly sobs that left her breathless. Decades of swallowed disappointment came pouring out. Yet beneath the collapse, a tiny spark flickered anger, sharp and cold, the kind that doesn't burn out quickly. When the tears finally stopped, Evelyn sat motionless. Her eyes were dry, her mind strangely clear. Somewhere inside, a quiet decision had already been made. Even if her mouth hadn't said it yet. She rose, walked to the window, and looked out. The city stretched endlessly, glass towers, blinking lights, cars sliding through puddles. So much movement, so much life, and she had been standing still for years. Her husband's voice drifted faintly from memory. Something he used to say when she doubted herself. "You've survived worse. Evie, you're stronger than you look." She smiled faintly. Maybe it's time to prove it. That night, she sat at the kitchen table long after the sun disappeared, pen in hand, notebook open. On the first page, she wrote one word in bold, shaky letters, "Enough." Then she started listing every small cruelty, every manipulation, every dismissal. She wasn't sure why. Maybe to remind herself that it hadn't been imagined. Maybe because seeing it on paper made it real. By the time she looked up, 5 pages were full. She stared at the last sentence and whispered, "I was never the crazy one." For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt awake. She closed the notebook gently, poured herself a glass of water, and looked around the apartment. The same furniture, the same flickering lamp, but the air had shifted. The old Evelyn was gone, washed away somewhere between the bathroom door and this new silence. Tomorrow, she thought, she would start planning. Tomorrow, she would act. But tonight, she would rest, not as a woman waiting for approval, but as a woman quietly sharpening her courage. Rehook. She had entered the bathroom a mother. She stepped out something else entirely, a woman ready to be seen. The ledger of small cruelties morning crept in through the thin curtains like it was apologizing for arriving. Evelyn's heart woke before the alarm, before the street stirred, before memory had the chance to sting again. The air inside the apartment felt heavier than usual, swollen with what she'd heard yesterday. For a moment she simply sat there, half upright in bed, watching the sunlight spread over the wallpaper. Dust motes drifted lazily through the beams. She thought they looked like suspended seconds, time refusing to move forward until she decided which life to step into. Down the hallway, the refrigerator side, the kettle ticked as the metal cooled. Those small sounds again, the same chorus that had once comforted her, but now each one felt like punctuation in a list she hadn't yet written. She pushed the blanket aside, padded barefoot to the kitchen, and set water to boil. The whistle rose too soon, shrill and impatient. "Hold on," she whispered, silencing it. Then she pulled a notebook from the drawer, a cheap spiral one, the kind she used for grocery lists. Its first page was still blank. She wrote a single word across the top in neat block letters, "Reasons." First her pen hovered, uncertain. Then, as if something inside her cracked open, the words came pouring out. "You won't need it long. Think of our future. We'll take care of you, of course. Stop worrying about money. You have us." She wrote every phrase that had ever carried a hidden blade, phrases that smiled while cutting. For decades she had treated them as misunderstandings, small slips of love lost in translation. Now she saw them clearly for what they were, tiny thefts of dignity, one polite moment at a time. By the third page, her handwriting wavered. The tears that fell weren't for sorrow this time, but for recognition. She had been living with 1,000 paper cuts and calling it motherhood. Evelyn kept writing until her wrist ached. Each memory arrived like a ghost wanting to confess. The time Miles told her to stop hoarding junk, the family photo albums, the lace doilies, the letters from Alistair because buyers like open space. The Christmas when Rena laughed about her old-fashioned gifts, whispering that cash is more practical. The afternoon they'd both forgotten her birthday dinner reservation because a realtor had an opening. She filled 5 full pages before stopping. The ink had bled through in places, staining the table beneath. She stared at the mess, then smiled faintly. The table had always been too perfect. Now it bore proof that she existed. She made herself breakfast, 1 egg, 1 piece of toast, black coffee. She ate slowly, thinking. The house no longer felt haunted by loneliness. It felt witness to her becoming. On the counter sat an old photo of her younger self, hair dark, eyes bright, holding baby Miles in her arms. She studied it, the innocence in both their faces. "How did we end up here?" she murmured. Her reflection in the glass gave no answer, but she realized something. That woman in the picture would never have believed. She'd one day need protection from her own child. And yet here she was, building armor out of paper and ink. Later that morning, she went to the living room and began sorting through drawers, old bills, letters, receipts. She started labeling folders, utilities, mortgage, title deed, insurance. Each document she touched steadied her heartbeat. For years she'd let Miles handle things, signing whatever form he'd slid across the table. Now she read every line as if deciphering a foreign language she finally decided to learn. When she reached the deed, her name looked almost new again. Evelyn M. Hart, typed in capital letters, sharp as a boundary. She traced it with her fingertip. "Still mine," she whispered. She tucked the notebook of cruelties beside the deed in a clean envelope. It felt ceremonial, like burying the dead before beginning the next chapter. Around noon, she opened the window. The city outside was waking properly now. Children shouting on their way to school. Vendors arguing about prices. A siren somewhere far away. Life, messy and loud. She let the noise in. It made the apartment feel less like a tomb. Her phone buzzed. A text from Miles. "Hey Mom. Sorry if we upset you yesterday. Rena feels terrible. Let's talk soon." No apology. Just damage control. She didn't reply. Instead, she wrote his message word for word on a new page, then added beneath it in careful cursive, "They say sorry when caught, not when wrong." For years, she had confused being needed with being loved. Now she understood the difference. Need was a leash. Love was wings. And she was tired of being tethered. That evening, she brewed another pot of coffee and sat by the window watching the sky turn bruised purple. The notebook lay open beside her, the last entry still blank. She picked up the pen one final time and wrote, "Plan, find freedom." She underlined it twice. Then she began a new list, this one of possibilities. Sell quietly, keep control, move somewhere smaller, safer, live once more before leaving forever. For each idea, she jotted tiny practical steps. Call a realtor, gather bank info, research senior housing near the pier. She wasn't entirely sure she'd follow through, but even the act of writing was rebellion enough for now. It felt like breathing after being underwater too long. As night thickened, she stood before the mirror in the hallway. The same mirror she'd been cleaning yesterday when the truth first struck. She looked herself in the eye. "You waited your whole life for someone to protect you," she said quietly. "It's time to become that person." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, the first storm of spring. Rain began to trace soft trails down the glass. Evelyn left the window open just enough to let the scent of wet earth drift inside. She liked how the air felt, clean, alive, unpredictable. She gathered her pages, stacked them neatly, and placed them in the drawer beside her bed. 5 pages of small cruelties, and 1 new page of plans, evidence and intention side by side. The house, once her prison, now felt like witness. Every tick of the clock sounded like applause for the courage it took to finally write things down. Before sleeping, she whispered into the darkness, "Tomorrow, I start over. No dramatic vow, No cinematic music, just a calm promise to herself. She didn't yet know how, only that she would, and for the first time in years, she slept without dreaming of anyone else's approval. Care has a taste. This isn't it. Tomorrow, she would find out what real care for herself tastes like. Ext. The sentence I needed to hear: the world can hand you a revelation in the most ordinary places. For Evelyn Hart, it happened in the lobby of the Harborview Savings Bank beneath buzzing fluorescent lights and the smell of overbrewed coffee. She had come to fix a clerical error. Her husband's middle initial, still printed on every statement, 7 years after his death, the kind of small oversight that life piles quietly on widows. She'd waited in line with a numbered ticket, her purse pressed close to her ribs, listening to the slow shuffle of other people's errands. When her number blinked at 27, she stepped forward, heart oddly fast for such a dull task. The young teller barely looked 20. She typed while chewing gum, eyes on the screen. "We can update the account holder name, Mrs. Hart. You'll need to sign this affidavit." Pen scratching paper, mundane, unremarkable, yet something inside Evelyn trembled. Signing her name without his initial felt like claiming new ground. It was just ink, but it sounded like mine. While the teller printed copies, to women, at the next counter, caught her ear. Their voices floated lightly across the room, half whisper, half confession. "My mom finally sold her house," the first said, flipping through a folder. "Tiny condo near the pier. She said she worked 40 years for everyone else. It's time she worked for sunsets." The older one gasped. "She sold? Weren't your brothers furious?" "Oh, completely," the younger woman laughed. "But she told them something perfect. It's my name on the deed, not yours. I swear, it shut them up instantly." The older woman chuckled. "Good for her. I could never. My sons would kill me." The first leaned closer, voice soft but firm. "It's her money, her life. Why should she need anyone's permission?" The phrase landed in Evelyn's chest like a stone thrown into still water. Why should she need anyone's permission? Permission, the word echoed, bounced off years of obedience, ricocheted through all the be reasonable and it's just tradition she'd swallowed. For 66 years she'd lived by consensus, asking, checking, waiting for approval from people who never asked her what she wanted. She stood there motionless, receipt in one hand, the other pressed lightly to her sternum, as though steadying that single word, permission. Not theirs, hers. When the teller slid the updated papers across the counter, Evelyn smiled differently. "Thank you," she said, voice low but sure. The young woman barely noticed the tremor of revolution behind the politeness. Outside, Harborview's spring air bit cool against her cheeks. The city shimmered with small noises, traffic gulls, snippets of conversation, but the world itself seemed newly drawn. She walked slower than usual, letting the rhythm of her shoes echo in her ears. Each step sounded like punctuation at the end of a lifetime of questions. At the corner cafe, she ordered a coffee to go, and sat at a sidewalk table she'd never chosen before. Usually she would hurry home, afraid of wasting time. Today she watched people instead: the couple sharing one pastry, the teenager laughing into her phone, an old man sketching seagulls on a napkin. None of them looked like they were waiting for permission to exist. Evelyn pulled out her notebook, the same one filled with her ledger of small cruelties. She turned to a fresh page and wrote the word in large letters, permission. Then she circled it 3 times, as if drawing a spell. That evening she made a decision. She dug through the yellow pages stacked near the phone stand and found the listing she wanted. Adele Moreno, realtor, discreet service, quick closings. The ad had a tiny logo of a key inside a circle. Something about it felt right. Her hands trembled as she dialed. It wasn't fear this time, it was adrenaline, the body's way of asking, "Are we really doing this?" A calm voice answered. "Moreno Realty." "Hello," Evelyn said, forcing "I'd like to discuss a possible sale." Quietly. "No open houses. I value privacy." There was a brief pause. Then warmth. "Of course, I specialize in that. May I come by tomorrow to assess the property?" "Tomorrow," Evelyn said. Yes, tomorrow would be fine. After she hung up, she stood in the living room, staring at the walls. It didn't feel like betrayal anymore. It felt like reclaiming air. The next afternoon, Adele Moreno arrived, a woman in her 40s with espresso-colored eyes and a voice made of composure. She walked the apartment slowly, taking notes, humming approval at the natural light. "It's charming," she said. "Solid structure. You've cared for it." "I tried," Evelyn replied, realizing only now how much that was true. Adele looked up from her clipboard. Are we selling because you have to, or because you want to? Evelyn hesitated. Because I choose to. The realtor smiled. Good answer. Let's keep this simple. We can list it privately, word of mouth only. I already have a nurse and her partner looking for something like this. Cash buyers. Quick close. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Cash buyers. How quick? 10 days. If inspection passes, you won't have to stage a thing. 10 days. 10 days to change her life. She nodded slowly. Do it. Adele extended a hand. Then congratulations, Mrs. Hart. You're taking control. When their palms met, Evelyn felt an electric certainty. For the first time in years, she wasn't reacting to life, she was steering it. That night, she brewed chamomile tea and opened the window to let in the harbor wind. The city lights glittered like possibilities she had never permitted herself to imagine. She pulled her notebook closer and beneath permission wrote a new list. Call, bank and firm account solely in my name, gather deeds, insurance, utilities, begin packing essentials only. Find new apartment, one with sunlight. Tell no one until signed. When she finished, she read the list aloud. Her voice sounded foreign but strong. Every item was small, yet together they built a staircase out of fear. Before bed she slipped the notebook beneath her pillow, the way children hide lost teeth, trusting that something valuable would replace what they'd let go. Days blurred into motion. Inspections, signatures, polite, professional emails. The nurse couple toured briefly, smiling at her garden view, and made an offer before leaving. Adele called that evening. Full asking price. Cash. They adore the place. Evelyn's answer came without hesitation. Accepted. When she hung up, the silence around her shifted again. This time it didn't accuse, it applauded. She brewed tea, carried the cup to the balcony, and watched dusk spill over the harbor. The city breathed below, oblivious to the miracle taking place in apartment to be, a woman learning, finally, that her life didn't need signatures of approval besides her own. She whispered the word, once more permission, and felt it settle inside her like warmth after winter. Read, hook: if I am invisible, nobody will see me leaving. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The sentence I needed to hear. The world can hand you a revelation in the most ordinary places. For Evelyn Hart, it happened in the lobby of the Harborview Savings, banked beneath buzzing fluorescent lights and the smell of overbrewed coffee. She had come to fix a clerical error. Her husband's middle initial still printed on every statement, 7 years after his death. The kind of small oversight that life piles quietly on widows. She'd waited in line with a numbered ticket, her purse pressed close to her ribs, listening to the slow shuffle of other people's errands. When her number blinked at 27, she stepped forward, heart oddly fast for such a dull task. The young teller barely looked 20. She typed while chewing gum, eyes on the screen. We can update the account holder name, Mrs. Hart. You'll need to sign this affidavit. Pen scratching, paper mundane, unremarkable. Yet something inside Evelyn trembled. Signing her name without his initial felt like claiming new ground. It was just ink, but it sounded like mine. While the teller printed copies, 2 women, at the next counter, caught her ear. Their voices floated lightly across the room, half whisper, half confession. My mom finally sold her house, the first said, flipping through a folder. Tiny condo near the pier. She said she worked 40 years for everyone else. It's time she works for sunsets. The older one gasped. She sold. Weren't your brothers furious? Oh, completely. The younger woman laughed. But she told them something perfect. It's my name on the deed, not yours. I swear, it shut them up instantly. The older woman chuckled. Good for her. I could never. My sons would kill me. The first leaned closer, voice soft but firm. It's her money, her life. Why should she need anyone's permission? The phrase landed in Evelyn's chest like a stone thrown into still water. Why should she need anyone's permission? Permission. The word echoed, bounced off years of obedience, ricocheted through all the be reasonable s. And it's just tradition s she'd swallowed. For 66 years she'd lived by consensus sissies, checking, waiting for approval from people who never asked her what she wanted. She stood there, motionless, receipt in one hand, the other pressed lightly to her sternum as though steadying that single word, permission, not theirs, hers. When the teller slid the updated papers across the counter, Evelyn smiled differently. Thank you, she said, voice low but sure. The young woman barely noticed the tremor of revolution behind the politeness. Outside, Harborview's spring air bit cool against her cheeks. The city shimmered with small noises, traffic gulls, snippets of conversation. but the world itself seemed newly drawn. She walked slower than usual, letting the rhythm of her shoes echo in her ears. Each step sounded like punctuation at the end of a lifetime of questions. At the corner cafe, she ordered a coffee to go, and sat at a sidewalk table she'd never chosen before. Usually she would hurry home, afraid of wasting time. Today she watched people instead, the couple sharing one pastry, the teenager laughing into her phone, an old man sketching seagulls on a napkin. None of them looked like they were waiting for permission to exist. Evelyn pulled out her notebook, the same one filled with her ledger of small cruelties. She turned to a fresh page and wrote the word in large letters, permission. Then she circled it 3 times, as if drawing a spell. That evening, she made a decision. She dug through the yellow pages stacked near the phone stand and found the listing she wanted. Adele Moreno, realtor, discreet service, quick closings. The ad had a tiny logo of a key inside a circle. Something about it felt right. Her hands trembled as she dialed. It wasn't fear this time, it was adrenaline, the body's way of asking, "Are we really doing this?" A calm voice answered, "Moreno Realty." "Hello," Evelyn said, forcing steadiness. "I'd like to discuss a possible sale." Quietly. "No open houses. I value privacy." There was a brief pause, then warmth. "Of course, I specialize in that. May I come by tomorrow to assess the property?" "Tomorrow," Evelyn said. Yes, tomorrow would be fine. After she hung up, she stood in the living room, staring at the walls. It didn't feel like betrayal anymore. It felt like reclaiming air. The next afternoon, Adele Moreno arrived, a woman in her 40s, with espresso-colored eyes and a voice made of composure. She walked the apartment slowly, taking notes, humming approval at the natural light. "It's charming," she said. "Solid structure. You've cared for it." "I tried," Evelyn replied, realizing only now how much that was true. Adele looked up from her clipboard. "Are we selling because you have to, or because you want to?" Evelyn hesitated. "Because I choose to." The realtor smiled. "Good answer. Let's keep this simple. We can list it privately, word of mouth only. I already have a nurse and her partner looking for something like this. Cash buyers, quick close." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "Cash buyers. How quick?" 10 days, if inspection passes. "You won't have to stage a thing." 10 days. 10 days to change her life. She nodded slowly. "Do it." Adele extended a hand. "Then, congratulations, Mrs. Hart. You're taking control." When their palms met, Evelyn felt an electric certainty. For the first time in years, she wasn't reacting to life, she was steering it. That night, she brewed chamomile tea and opened the window to let in the harbor wind. The city lights glittered like possibilities she had never permitted herself to imagine. She pulled her notebook closer and beneath permission wrote a new list. "Call bank, confirm account solely in my name, gather deeds, insurance, utilities, begin packing essentials only, find new apartment, one with sunlight, tell no one until signed." When she finished, she read the list aloud. Her voice sounded foreign but strong. Every item was small, yet together they built a staircase out of fear. Before bed, she slipped the notebook beneath her pillow, the way children hide lost teeth, trusting that something valuable would replace what they'd let go. Days blurred into motion. Inspections, signatures, polite, professional emails. The nurse couple toured briefly, smiling at her garden view, and made an offer before leaving. Adele called that evening. Full asking price. Cash. "They adore the place." Evelyn's answer came without hesitation. "Accept it." When she hung up, the silence around her shifted again. This time, it didn't accuse, it applauded. She brewed tea, carried the cup to the balcony, and watched dusk spill over the harbor. The city breathed below, oblivious to the miracle taking place in apartment to be. A woman learning, finally, that her life didn't need signatures of approval besides her own. She whispered the word once more, permission, and felt it settle inside her like warmth after winter. If I am invisible, nobody will see me leaving. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The table for 3, the night smelled of olive oil and something rehearsed. Evelyn knew the invitation was a setup the moment her son called. "Dinner. Our treat," he'd said, as if generosity could erase pattern. Miles had never offered to pay for a meal in his adult life. Still, she said yes. Sometimes the only way to end a war was to walk into it yourself. The restaurant was small brick walls, amber lights, the hum of soft jazz competing with the clink of cutlery. In another life, it might have been romantic. Tonight it was an arena disguised as hospitality, Evelyn arrived early. She chose a seat that let her watch the door. She ordered water, nothing more. Her reflection in the glass of the candle holder surprised her. Calm, composed, not frightened. The woman staring back looked like someone who'd already made her peace with the outcome. At 7 o'clock sharp, Miles entered, phone in hand, Rena gliding behind him like a shadow in perfume. They spotted her, smiled with all their teeth, and crossed the room. "Mama Evelyn," Rena cooed, "you look lovely tonight." Evelyn rose slightly, nodded. "You're both punctual, that's new." Miles laughed too quickly. "Come on, Mom, let's enjoy the evening." No need to be sarcastic. He signaled to the waiter before they'd even sat down, his old habit of control disguised as efficiency. 3 menus opened. Silence stretched. They began with pleasantries, the kind that mean nothing, work updates, weather, a new TV show Rena was obsessed with. Evelyn listened, murmured the right noises, waited for the real conversation to arrive. It came exactly between the appetizer and the main course. Miles cleared his throat, folded his napkin with precision, and leaned forward. "Mom, we're worried about you." Evelyn tilted her head. "Are you?" "Of course," Rena jumped in. "You're all alone in that big place. What if something happens? God forbidden, no one's there." There it was, the opening hook of guilt. Miles nodded solemnly. "That's why we think it'd be best if you moved closer to us, maybe even in with us for a while. We'd feel better knowing you're safe." "How thoughtful," Evelyn said. She took a sip of water. "But you're forgetting something important." "What's that?" "I already sold it." Their faces froze like actors who'd skipped the line that explained the plot. Rena blinked first. "Sold what?" "The condo." Miles's fork clattered against his plate. "You, what?" "I sold the condo 3 weeks ago," Evelyn repeated softly, her tone as measured as a newsreader. "It's done. Paperwork finalized." The table fell silent except for the faint hiss of candle wax. Rena recovered first, voice trembling between shock and outrage. "Why would you do that without telling us?" "Because it wasn't yours to discuss," Evelyn replied. "It was mine to decide." Miles's face turned red, his composure cracking. "I promised Rena that place." "I told her." "Then you promised her something that was never yours," Evelyn cut in. "And that's on you, not me." The waiter arrived with steaming plates, pasta, steak, salad. No one touched them. He left quickly, sensing the storm. Miles slammed his hand on the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. "You've ruined everything. We counted on that down payment." Evelyn met his fury with quiet steel. "You counted on my death, Miles." "Don't soften the word," Rena gasped. "That's a cruel thing to say." "What's cruel?" Evelyn said evenly. "Is hearing your own child discuss your apartment as future property while you're still scrubbing the bathroom sink." Her words cut cleanly, leaving no room for denial. Miles looked around as though the walls could offer him backup. "So that's it. You sell it, keep the cash, and leave us with nothing." "I left you with plenty," Evelyn said. "I left you your health, your job, your independence. What you wanted was inheritance in advance, and life doesn't work like that." Rena's voice rose an octave, trembling with theatrical tears. "We only wanted to start a family, give you grandchildren. We thought you'd want to help." Evelyn's lips curved in something close to pity. "Grandchildren don't begin with manipulation, dear. They begin with love, and love doesn't come with a price tag." The music in the restaurant seemed louder now, as if to drown the argument. Other diners pretended not to notice, but glances flicked over menus. Evelyn didn't care. Shame was a currency she no longer traded in. Miles leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "You owe me, Mom. Everything I am comes from you and Dad. The least you can do is—" She stopped him with a raised palm. "Exactly. You are everything your father and I worked for. You got the education, the freedom, the chance to build a life. The least you can do is stop treating me like collateral." Rena stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. "This is unbelievable. After all we've done for you," Evelyn laughed once, softly. "You mean after all you've expected from me?" For a moment, the world narrowed to the flicker of the candle between them. Evelyn noticed her own reflection in Miles's eyes, older, smaller, but still there, still standing. She reached into her purse, pulled out a small envelope, and slid it across the table. Inside was a USB drive. "Recordings," she said, "from the days you thought I wasn't listening. You might want to hear yourselves before accusing me of selfishness again." Miles stared at it like it might explode. "You recorded us?" "I documented the truth," Evelyn said, "because women like me are always accused of imagining things." Rena whispered, "That's psychotic." "No," Evelyn said calmly, "that's prepared." They left soon after, unable to finish the meal. Rena's heels clicked like gunfire as she stormed out. Miles lingered a moment longer, torn between anger and disbelief. "You'll regret this," he said finally. "I already did," she replied, "for 40 years." Then she turned back to her plate, cut a small piece of lettuce, and ate it slowly while he walked away. The food tasted like peace, quiet, bitter, necessary. When she left the restaurant, rain had started. She didn't open her umbrella. The drops cooled her face, washed the tremor out of her hands. Streetlights blurred into golden halos. She walked home through the wet city, unhurried, her reflection following steady in every puddle. Halfway across the bridge, she stopped to look at the river. The current roared softly, pulling everything forward, whether it was ready or not. "I'm ready," she whispered. At home, she changed into her soft nightgown, brewed tea, and placed the candle from the restaurant she'd taken it absent-mindedly on her kitchen table. Its tiny flame danced in the dark room. Across from it sat 2 empty chairs. She smiled faintly. "A table for 3, she murmured, "but only one of us ever learned to eat alone." Rihukta had come for her surrender and left with their reflection instead. The next chapter would be written in her own ink, no signatures required. The quiet condo. The first thing Evelyn noticed was the light. Her new apartment didn't hold it, it welcomed it. Morning poured through wide windows, brushing across the floor in long, forgiving strokes. No shadows crouched in corners anymore. The place smelled faintly of fresh paint and possibility. The movers had gone. Boxers lined the walls like silent witnesses waiting for her permission to exist. She stood barefoot in the middle of the small living room, one hand resting on her chest, listening to her own heartbeat echo softly in the empty space. "It's mine," she thought. "All of it. Finally mine." She began unpacking slowly, not to fill the room but to introduce herself to it. First came the essentials: a kettle, her favorite chipped mug, the worn quilt she'd kept since her wedding day. Then the little things that made a place breathe: a stack of books, a framed photo of her late husband, a fern she'd bought impulsively on the way over. She didn't rush to decorate. For once, she wasn't preparing for anyone's arrival. The silence that once suffocated her now stretched open like fresh air. She could hear the distant rhythm of footsteps from the hallway, a dog barking somewhere below, the hum of the city alive but gentle, not intruding, just existing alongside her. When the kettle whistled, she smiled, the same sound she'd heard every morning for decades, but now it meant something new. It didn't announce routine, it announced freedom. She poured tea, carried it to the window, and sat on the small bench that overlooked the street. A group of children were chasing one another through the puddles left by last night's rain. Their laughter rose up to her balcony. For years she'd mistaken that sound, believing happiness was something that only came from others. Today she understood. Sometimes joy was just noticing the world without asking to be noticed back. The next days passed like pages turning themselves. Evelyn woke when she wanted, read until noon, cooked simply, and slept soundly. No guilt, no rush, no explanations. Each small act felt like reclaiming a word she'd forgotten how to speak. Boiling water, opening curtains, choosing music. She played old records. Her husband used to love jazz. Mostly, the trumpet filled the condo with a warmth she hadn't realized she'd been starved of. On the third morning, she found an envelope from the bank confirming the deposit from the sale. 6 figures money that used to symbolize fear now looked like safety written in numbers. She placed the paper in a folder marked "For Me," slid it into the drawer, and exhaled deeply. By the end of the week, she'd begun exploring the neighborhood. There was a bakery downstairs where the owner, a woman with a flour-dusted apron, learned her name by day 2. There was a park half a block away where pigeons gathered in lazy circles, and there was a community center with a bright orange sign that read, "Art for all, no experience needed." She paused outside the window the first time she saw it. Inside, women around her age were painting at easels, their laughter spilling out like sunlight. For a moment, she thought of walking away, that old instinct whispering, "You don't belong here." But then she remembered the promise she'd made to herself in the notebook: find freedom. Try something new. She pushed the door open. The room smelled of acrylics and linseed oil. The instructor, a silver-haired woman named Eleanor Vance, smiled in welcome. "We don't aim for masterpieces here," she said. "We aim for release." Evelyn felt awkward at first, holding the brush too tightly, afraid of making a mess, but Eleanor's voice floated through the room like a kind wind. "There are no mistakes in color, only discoveries." Stroke by stroke, Evelyn began to breathe differently. She painted not what she saw, but what she felt. streaks of gray melting into yellow, black fading into coral. The canvas didn't judge, it just received. At the end of class, she stepped back and looked at what she'd done. It was chaotic and imperfect, but somehow, it looked alive. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said gently. "Do you see the movement here? That's courage." Evelyn smiled, a real one, not the polite version she'd practiced for years. "Courage," she repeated quietly. "I didn't know it looked like this." She kept returning. Tuesdays and Thursdays became sacred. The women there became companions: Ruth Baker with her wild laugh, Denise with her quiet humor, Eleanor with her patient wisdom. Together they drank coffee, shared stories, and filled silence with color. One afternoon, Ruth said, "Funny thing, isn't it, how we all thought life ended at 60. Evelyn laughed. "Turns out it just starts getting honest." Their laughter filled the studio, warm, resonant, free. Back at home, Evelyn hung her first finished painting in the living room. It was abstract, swirling blues and golds. She titled it "Beginning in Silence." Every time she passed it, she felt something shift inside her chest, proof that she could still create, still change, still begin again. She started keeping a journal too, not a ledger of pain this time, but of discoveries. Day 4, I'm sleeping through the night. Day 6, tea tastes better when I'm not waiting for company. Day 9, the world keeps moving, and it's okay if I don't chase it. The loneliness she used to dread didn't vanish. It transformed. It became solitude, a softer, more loyal companion. Sometimes she still missed Miles. Sometimes she missed who he used to be, that little boy who'd bring her seashells from school trips. But now, the ache didn't own her. It visited politely, then left her in peace. One evening, while watching dusk paint the sky outside her window, she whispered, "Maybe I didn't lose my son. Maybe I just found myself." The wind stirred the curtains gently, as if in agreement. Weeks passed, plants filled her balcony. Her mornings became rituals: tea, sunlight, a page of writing, and sometimes, in the quietest hours, she'd hear her husband's voice in her memory saying, "You were never meant to fade, Evie." She'd smile, tracing the rim of her mug, whispering, "I'm not fading anymore." Rehook. The silence that once drowned her now sang her name. Evelyn Hart had not escaped her old life. She had finally stepped into her own. The visitor in the rain returned, exactly 2 months after she'd moved in. Not a storm this time, just a patient, endless drizzle that turned the city into watercolor. Evelyn Hart was painting when she heard the knock. 3 soft raps, hesitant. Not the landlord, not delivery. She set the brush down, wiped her hands on a towel, and listened again. Another knock, the rhythm of someone rehearsing courage. When she opened the door, he was standing there. Miles. He looked smaller than she remembered, thinner, paler, the sharpness of success blunted by sleeplessness. Rain slicked his hair to his forehead. His tie hung crooked, his shoes soaked. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of water pattering against the hallway floor filled the space between them. Finally he whispered, "Hi, Mom." Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She stepped aside. "Come in before you drown." He obeyed, awkwardly wiping his feet on the mat. The apartment smelled of chamomile and turpentine, strange, homely, alive. He glanced around, visibly surprised. "Nice, different." "It's enough," she said. He followed her to the small kitchen table, where 2 mugs already waited, one half finished, one clean. She poured him tea without asking. Old reflex. It hurt a little, how natural it still was. They sat in silence, steam curling between them. The rain tapped the windows, steady as a heartbeat. Miles stared into his cup. "Rena left," he said finally. Evelyn looked up. "I see." She said I was angry all the time, said I was turning into someone she didn't recognize. He laughed dryly. "She's not wrong." Evelyn didn't rush to comfort him. She had learned that silence could be medicine too. He rubbed his temples. "I lost my job last week. Company downsizing. I've been staying at a friend's place. When it started raining today, I just ended up here." He looked around again, eyes flicking to her paintings, the abstract ones, full of wild blues and golds. "You're painting now?" "Yes, they're actually really good. Thank you." The simplicity of the exchange startled them both. For the first time in years, the words between them didn't hide a blade. Miles exhaled, shaky. "Mom, I'm sorry." Evelyn's chest tightened, not from anger, but from the old instinct to forgive too quickly. She steadied herself before speaking. "Sorry, for what, exactly?" He swallowed. "For everything. for treating you like a problem to solve instead of a person, for assuming your life ended when Dad's did, for, his voice broke, for thinking your love was just a safety net. Evelyn stared at him, her son who looked suddenly very young again. It wasn't a net, Miles, she said softly. It was a bridge. You just forgot to look back. Tears blurred his eyes. You're right, I was stupid. No, she said. You were scared. Fear turns love into demand. I've lived long enough to know the difference. He wiped his face roughly. You must hate me. I did, she admitted, for one night. Then I remembered who raised you, and I decided you'd figure it out, eventually. He looked up sharply. And if I hadn't, then I'd still be fine. It wasn't cruelty. It was truth, the most loving kind. The clock ticked softly. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. Miles's shoulders trembled. I don't know what to do anymore. Start small, Evelyn said. Stop running from the mirror. Apologize to yourself before you apologize to others. He nodded, staring at his hands. I thought I lost everything. But you look happier than I've ever seen you. I am, she said simply, because I stopped waiting for permission to be. He gave a weak laugh. You always were stronger than me. Not stronger, she corrected, just finally honest. They sat for a while longer, listening to the rain soften. The tension that had once filled every silence between them was gone, replaced by something fragile and tentative. When Miles finally stood to leave, he hesitated near the door. Can I come back? Not to stay, just to visit. Maybe help you with groceries or something. Evelyn smiled faintly. You can visit, the groceries I can handle. He nodded, accepting the boundary with quiet gratitude. He slipped on his damp coat, then turned. Mom, yes, do you still have that old notebook, the one you used to keep lists in? She thought of the ledger of small cruelties hidden in her drawer, its pages now resting beside a second notebook. Discoveries. Yes, she said, but I've started a new one. What's in it? Things I'm learning. He smiled through tired eyes. Maybe one day you'll let me read it. Maybe, she said. When you start your own. At the doorway he hesitated again. I really am sorry, Mom. She touched his cheek lightly, the first gesture of affection in years. I know, but don't say sorry to fix the past. Say it to build the future. He nodded. Then, I will. And with that, he stepped into the rain. The umbrella snapped open like a fragile promise. Evelyn watched from the window as he crossed the street. The drizzle softened, turning silver under the street. He paused halfway, looked back, and waved once, a small, uncertain gesture that somehow felt like a beginning. She lifted her hand too. When she closed the door, the condo felt different again, not emptier, lighter. The storm inside her chest had finally quieted. She returned to her easel, dipped her brush in gold, and drew a thin line through the center of the canvas, a horizon breaking open. Her next painting would be called The Visitor in the Rain. That night she wrote in her journal, Day 62, he came back. The rain didn't bring the past, it washed it clean. She placed the pen down, looked around her glowing little condo, and whispered into the hush. He found the door. I just had to open it. Rehook. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give the guilty, it's the door you unlock for yourself, and Evelyn Hart had finally stepped through. The receipt of peace the mornings no longer startled her. For years she had woken to the sound of alarms, worry, or need. Now she woke to sunlight, simple, golden, patient sunlight that painted slow stripes across her floor. Evelyn Hart stretched beneath her quilt and listened. The city hummed outside, distant but kind. The kettle clicked as it heated. The fern rustled against the windowpane, and her heartbeat matched the rhythm of it all. Peace, she realized, doesn't arrive with fanfare. It sneaks in quietly, like forgiveness. That week she found herself returning to old habits, not out of nostalgia, but curiosity. She opened a folder labeled Records. Inside were the legal papers from the condo sale, bank statements, insurance letters, and one slip she hadn't noticed before, final disbursement receipt. At the bottom, her signature curved, strong, and deliberate, Evelyn M. Hart. She smiled. It looked steadier than the one on her wedding license, bolder than the one on her first paycheck. This one carried no one else's name beside it. She pinned the receipt to the corkboard above her desk, a small declaration. I paid the price, and I own the piece. Later that morning, she wrote another journal entry, Day 78. The world didn't end when I stopped apologizing. It began. She set down the pen, made tea, and stepped onto the balcony. The air smelled of baked bread from the shop below, sea-salted wind from the harbor, and faint lilac from her neighbor's window box. She closed her eyes, breathing in the ordinary magic of belonging nowhere but the present moment. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find her neighbor, a woman in her 70s named Ruth Baker. One of her new art class friends, holding a covered dish. "Leftover peach cobbler," Ruth said. "Too sweet for me. Thought you might like some." Evelyn grinned. "I was just thinking of something sweet." They sat by the window, eating straight from the dish with mismatched spoons. Ruth told her about the art center's upcoming exhibition. "Eleanor wants everyone to display one piece," she said. "You should put one in, maybe that storm painting." Evelyn laughed. "The Visitor in the Rain. I don't think anyone would understand it." Ruth winked. "Then it's perfect. The ones that confuse people usually mean something." After Ruth left, Evelyn stared at the painting hanging on the opposite wall. Blue streaks, slashed by gold. A horizon between darkness and light. She decided to do it. Preparing for the exhibition gave her a kind of energy she hadn't felt in years. She printed her name on a placard in neat letters. Evelyn Hart, beginning in silence, Visitor in the Rain. Seeing the two titles together made her smile. They sounded like chapters of the same story. The night of the show, she arrived early. The community hall smelled of varnish and coffee, laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Her paintings hung side by side under soft yellow light. People stopped to look, strangers, mostly, and she stood a few steps away, pretending not to watch. A young woman paused in front of Visitor in the Rain. "It feels forgiving," she murmured to her friend. "Forgiving." Evelyn felt tears warm her eyes. She turned away before anyone could see. When she returned home, she found an envelope on her doormat. No name on the front, just Mom in Miles's handwriting. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The writing was uneven, rushed. "I don't know how to say this out loud. I started therapy. I'm learning things about myself I didn't want to face. I wanted to hate you for cutting me off. But you were right. I needed to lose control to find it again. If you can, keep the door open. If you can't, I'll understand. Love, Miles." A small Polaroid was tucked inside a picture of him volunteering at a community kitchen. Sleeves rolled up, smile tentative but real. On the back, he'd written one line, "Trying to build my own bridge." Evelyn pressed the photo to her chest. The ache that bloomed there wasn't pain anymore. It was pride. The next morning, she replied, "Dear Miles, the door was never locked. I only needed to learn how to walk through it without carrying the past. Keep building. I'm proud of you, Mom." She sealed the letter, stamped it, and placed it by the front door. She would mail it on her afternoon walk, after her tea, after her quiet. By late afternoon, clouds drifted apart, letting sunlight spill across the balcony. Evelyn carried her chair outside, notebook on her lap. The city below glimmered, the sounds of life folding together, laughter, engines, the distant cry of gulls. She wrote one final journal line, Day 79. "Peace doesn't erase what hurt you. It simply stops it from deciding who you are." Then she closed the notebook for good. As evening fell, she brewed another pot of chamomile. Her eyes lingered on the corkboard, the receipt of peace, yellowing slightly at the corners. She smiled and whispered, "Paid in full." The lights of the city flickered on, one window at a time, like stars learning to shine from below instead of above. She stood, turned off the lamp, and let the room fill with twilight. The final image was simple. An old woman standing in the middle of her quiet condo, wrapped in soft light, holding a cup of tea, and looking at the rain beginning again, not as a threat, but as a song she finally understood. Evelyn Hart didn't need a witness. She had her receipt. She had her peace. Hook epilogue line. Peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the moment you stop apologizing for hearing your own heartbeat. The contradiction of Closard's peace has a sound. For Evelyn Hart, it wasn't silence anymore. It was the creak of her chair, the hum of her kettle, the steady breath of her own existence filling the small condo like music she'd finally learned the words to. But peace, she discovered, was not a permanent state. It shifted. It questioned. Sometimes it even asked, "Now that you have it, what will you do with it?" Weeks had passed since her letter to Miles. They had exchanged small notes since, brief, careful, human, nothing dramatic, no tears, no grand apologies, just two people learning how to speak without history interrupting. Tonight, she was alone again. The rain had stopped, leaving the city rinsed clean, 1,000 reflections glinting off the wet streets. She sat by the window, pen poised above a blank page in a new notebook. Across the top, she wrote, "Contradictions." And then, slowly, "You can be free and still ache." You can forgive and still remember. You can love people who broke you, because the breaking shaped your kindness. She paused. The pen hovered. For the first time, she realized she wasn't writing to heal anymore. She was writing to understand. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ruth. Open your window. Look east. Evelyn did. Over the city skyline, fireworks burst silently, trails of gold bleeding into violet. Somewhere downtown, the community center was celebrating its 10-year anniversary. She could almost hear Eleanor's laughter drifting in the wind. She whispered, so much light, even in noise. Later, she turned on the radio, the same old jazz channel. The host's voice crackled warmly, introducing a late-night program called Songs for the Ones Who Stayed. The first tune was a trumpet solo, tender and slow. It sounded like goodbye and beginning all at once. Evelyn closed her eyes. She imagined Alistair's hand on her shoulder, steady, proud. You did it, Evie, his voice said in memory. You built a world after me. She smiled through tears. I didn't rebuild, she murmured. I built different. Around midnight, she wandered to the small gallery wall she'd made. The paintings hung in order, beginning in silence. Visitor in the rain, the storm, and the signature. The fourth, half-finished, leaned on the easel. A landscape of sunrise over the harbor, gold pushing through gray. She dipped her brush into white and traced thin strokes of light over the horizon. As she painted, she spoke softly to the empty room. Closure isn't about locking the door, is it? It's about leaving it open without waiting for anyone to walk in. When she stepped back, the painting shimmered, gentle, unfinished, honest. She decided not to sign it. Not every ending needs a name. She cleaned her brushes, humming to herself, and placed a small envelope on the windowsill. Inside was a letter she had written earlier that day, one she wasn't sure she'd ever send. 2 miles. If you ever wonder whether I forgive you, know that I never needed to. You were my child. You were always forgiven by default. The real question was whether I could forgive myself for staying small, for waiting too long to claim joy. And I did. That's my closure. It might not look like love, but it is. Mom. She didn't seal it. She liked the idea of leaving something open. Outside, thunder rolled far off, a polite reminder that peace can exist beside storms. She turned off the lights and let the room glow in the soft pulse of the city. From here, the streetlights looked like constellations on the ground. She realized something quietly profound. She didn't feel lonely anymore. She felt present. And presence was the truest opposite of emptiness. The next morning, the world woke pale and gentle. Evelyn brewed coffee, opened her balcony door, and found a small envelope tucked under it, the handwriting familiar. Morning, Mom. Coffee sometime. I'll bring pastries. She smiled, placed it beside her cup, and whispered, yes. Not as an answer, as permission to continue living. That afternoon, she went for a walk along the pier. The tide was low, gulls circling lazily overhead. Couples strolled by, tourists took pictures, and somewhere, a street musician played a slow harmonica tune that drifted over the waves. Evelyn stopped at the railing, the sea stretching endless before her. The horizon looked like the line she'd painted the night before, blurred, forgiving. She thought about all the versions of herself that had lived and died in the past year. The invisible widow, the trembling mother, the quiet fighter, and now, the calm witness. Each one had left something behind, a gift wrapped in pain. She whispered, thank you, to all of them. The wind carried it out to sea. When she returned home, she removed the receipt of peace from her corkboard and slipped it inside her journal. On the board, she pinned a new note instead. Keep the door open, but never wait at it. She read it twice, then turned toward her easel and began a new painting, not of storms, not of sorrow, but of the soft light that comes afterward. The brush moved easily, almost dancing. Each color melted into the next, blues into golds, endings into beginnings. For the first time, she didn't think about who might see it. The act itself was enough. As dusk settled, she sat on her balcony with her finished cup of tea and looked up at the first evening star. Her reflection glowed faintly in the glass. Older, yes, but utterly alive, she whispered. Maybe closure isn't a finish line. Maybe it's a place you learn to rest before walking again. And the city, bathed in warm light, seemed to nod back. Final rehook, epilogue line. She had searched for endings her whole life, and found instead the quiet truth of continuation. The resolution full circle twist. It began again. The way all things begin, with a letter, not the kind written in sorrow or demand, but one folded neatly in calm, addressed not to a person, but to the future. Evelyn Hart sat at her small kitchen table, pen poised above cream stationery. The morning sunlight warmed the page, spilling gold across the ink like gentle encouragement. Outside, the world carried on. Footsteps, laughter, whined against the glass. Life didn't pause for her anymore, and that was the beauty of it. She began to write. To whoever finds this, if this letter ever lands in your hands, it means I'm gone, not in grief, but in completion. I lived the long road of waiting and the brief joy of awakening, and somewhere between them, I learned the difference between love and permission. You don't need either to begin again. You just need quiet and courage. Consider this my last painting, written instead of brushed, a reminder that life doesn't end when people stop seeing you. It ends when you stop seeing yourself. So promise me this, you'll keep looking. Evelyn M. Hart. She placed the page in an envelope and sealed it gently, marking the date in the corner. Then she tucked it inside the back cover of her journal, the same one that held every entry since the day she began again. The act wasn't melancholy, it was orderly, her own quiet ritual of gratitude. That afternoon, she took her easel down to the pier. The day was bright but soft, the sky powdered with clouds drifting like thought. She sat up near the railing where the sea met the city, where the wind carried a mix of salt and sunlight. A small crowd passed occasionally, joggers, children, couples, each a flicker in her periphery. She didn't mind the company. It made the moment feel real. She began painting, not an image of her condo, not the skyline or the water, but light itself. Pale hues of yellow blending into blue, streaks of pink that had no clear border. The kind of painting that didn't describe a place, but a feeling. By the time the sun started dipping low, she stepped back. The canvas glowed, a horizon of warmth emerging from still water. She titled it, Continuing. That evening she carried it to the community center for Eleanor's new exhibit, The Art of Starting Over. People stopped to look. One teenager tilted her head and said softly, "It looks like peace that moves." Evelyn smiled. That's exactly what it is. The girl looked up at her. Did you make it after something hard? Evelyn nodded. After everything, the girl smiled, small and sincere. Then, I'll remember that. It was such a simple exchange, but Evelyn felt something shift, the quiet satisfaction of knowing her story might echo in someone else's beginning. Later that night, when she returned home, a small parcel sat by her door. The return address, read Miles Hart. Inside was a framed photograph. Miles, standing with a group of volunteers by a freshly painted shelter wall. On the back, a note. Thought you'd like to see what your bridge built. Love, M. Evelyn touched the frame gently. Her eyes filled, not with tears of loss this time, but with the fullness that comes when every piece finally fits where it was meant to. She placed the photograph on her shelf beside, beginning in silence. Two journeys, side by side, one of paint, one of forgiveness. The next morning came softly. Birds tapped at the balcony railing. Sunlight drifted through half-open blinds. Evelyn sat in her favorite chair with a cup of tea, journal resting on her lap. She opened it to the last page, the one where she'd written her final promise, and smiled. Then, quietly, she closed her eyes. It wasn't dramatic. No cinematic crescendo, no whispered final words, just the simple stillness of a woman who had finally returned to herself. When Ruth came by later that afternoon, she found the apartment full of light. Evelyn sat peacefully, the journal open beside her, her teacup still warm. On the table lay the letter to whoever finds this. Ruth read it slowly, tears softening her smile. "You did it, Evie," she whispered. "You really did." She called the others, Elena, Denise, and together they filled the apartment, not with mourning, but with stories, laughter, gratitude, color. Evelyn would have liked that the next week. Her paintings hung once more at the community exhibit, this time beneath a new title, The Life of Evelyn Hart, a study in continuation. Below Continuing hung a small placard, quoting her journal. Peace doesn't erase pain, it teaches it to speak softly. Months passed, the seasons turned. On certain mornings, Miles would visit the pier where his mother used to paint. He often brought coffee and sat in silence, watching the water shift between gray and gold. He always brought her journal with him, the one Ruth had given him after the memorial. He'd read it slowly, a few pages each visit, as if her voice lived between the lines. Sometimes, when he reached the final entry, he would whisper, "I see you now, Mom," and every time, the wind would rise, scattering light across the surface of the water, as if the horizon itself was answering. Closing scene narration style. The frame fades to the painting. Continuing, the colors ripple softly, gold over blue, endless motion, a voice, Evelyns.com, eternal. We don't disappear when our stories end. We continue in laughter, in color, in every small act of choosing peace over permission. And maybe that's all legacy really is. The music swells, quiet piano, slow strings, fade out. Final rehook, ending line for narrator. Her story didn't end with freedom, it ended with continuation. Because peace, once earned, doesn't die with you. It moves forward quietly, eternally, in the ones who finally understand.